Hello Internet, welcome to the channel. My name is Frankie, and in today's video we're going back to the Outback track and we are building for two adorable creatures, and that is of course the Quokka, which we did play about with the idea of being in the emu habitat, but we decided to add the wallabies instead. So we're going to be building for the Quokka and one of the most iconic Australian animals of all time, the koala. So going into this build, I had a brief idea of what I wanted to do, and that was to have a structure that the guests can go inside and see some indoor viewing of our animals, where they're going to be going for their shelter and whatnot, but also have a nice outdoors area that's going to be quite luscious and full of vegetation, and this will all be on a slope. That will give our guests a really nice view when looking into the outside portion of the enclosure, because it will be rising at the back and it will just add a bit of depth to the habitat, kind of like if you were to create a fish tank. I know that it's a method that people use when starting to do their aquascaping, as it's called, I think. You can correct me if I'm wrong, I've never done it myself, so I'm not entirely sure if that's what it's called. But raising the back, making sure that the soil and stuff is higher at the rear of the tank, makes it look as if though it's a bit deeper and gives it more depth. And that's the kind of thing that I'm going for with this habitat, creating a raised background to create some depth to it. In order to get a good idea of what I wanted the building to look like in terms of its footprint in our zoo, I decided to use the pathing tool and then set it all to a grid, so I could create a kind of footprint that I can then build around. For the main wall pieces for this building, we're going to use the Australian wood wall pieces, and these are from the Australian DLC. And I am using these because we've used them already in our zoo, and I want to create a consistent theme across the zoo. By using similar materials throughout, we're going to create quite a uniform look, and that is something that I really want to achieve with this zoo. Make it seem as if though it's been built with intention by using the same materials. And whilst I did decide to go mainly on the grid for this building, as with most of my buildings, I actually decided to go off-grid for our doorway, and the reason for that is I wanted to just have a bit more of an interesting shape, to be honest. Instead of having a right angle in this corner, we're going to have a little bit of a strange shape. It's no longer rectangular, this building, by having this slightly angled doorway keeps it interesting and makes it a little bit different. So that was really all of the thinking behind making this so needlessly complicated. Due to some of the landscaping I'd done previously, the bottom of these walls at certain points didn't actually connect with the earth underneath it. So in order to remedy that, we're going to use some smaller pieces of wood from the exact same building piece set and sink them into the ground, making sure to line them up with all of the building pieces we've already used. And this is just going to close up that gap and make it look a bit more seamless. And with the basic skeleton of this building complete, I was able to start adding some barriers. I'm going to start with the glass barrier because that is integral to this building, and I really wanted it to join at one end of the building and kind of create an L shape where our guests would be walking around, and as a result that means I'm going to have to move this archway at the front of the building over slightly just to accommodate for where the habitat is actually going to be interjecting with this building, because at the moment they'd have to kind of walk around and out, which isn't great. I'd like it to line up with the interior holding facility instead, so that's why I've moved it over ever so slightly. Where these animals are going to be sleeping and stuff inside the building, I wanted to make sure we had a nice glass roof to let through plenty of natural light, and it'll allow the koalas in particular to climb up and look out onto the horizon without actually leaving their building, because these animals love to climb and stuff, and if it's raining and they don't want to get soaked and fall to the ground due to how heavy they suddenly are, I think it'd be cool if they could still look out and kind of see the rest of the zoo from their little perch. So yeah, that's why I've created a glass roof here, and it's also going to help to keep it warm. Although now that I've said that out loud, that seems a bit silly because we're in Australia. So we've kind of created a little greenhouse, and we're probably going to cook koalas, which isn't great. Yeah, okay, moving on. The metal kind of looking posts that come as part of the glass barrier are, in my opinion, a little bit ugly. and as a result I want to mask them with something else. Now I could have gone down the wooden route as the entire building is made of wood, but what I decided to do was go and get some of the faux rocks and try to recolour them slightly to look more like the red desert rocks that we've been using throughout the zoo already. And then we're going to use these faux rocks in order to hide those metal beams and make a more, I don't know, a more natural looking kind of structure inside. Not only is this going to be a really cool thing for our guests to see, but having a more natural texture inside of the indoor area for our animals is also just going to help them feel a bit more at home. After raising the glass to meet the glass roof at the top of the structure, it became apparent that it just doesn't look right. It looks a little odd how these two pieces join. So to remedy that, I'm going to use some of the Australian planks, which look lovely and aged, kind of look like they've been bleached by the sun, and we're going to use those just to create a bit of a border at the top and bottom of our window panes. To create a suitable roof inside, we're just going to use the Australian wooden wall floor pieces, as that's going to match the walls. And we're just going to cover the entire roof area. And then we're going to start to move on to actually creating a roof. And I will be honest, this took me a very long time to get right due to the intersecting shapes and stuff. Because of the doorway that I've created where it's at an angle, everything just got way too complicated, which is kind of annoying. And I've only got myself to blame here. But, you know, it got a little bit frustrating. But we do end up with something really cool and quite interesting and not too normal looking, which is always fun. And the building pieces that we are using for this particular roof is the aluminium sheet looking things that are also part of the Australian pack. We are going really heavy on the theming in this zoo, and I am loving it. Back inside this structure, I decided to use the Arctic wood wall pieces to create a floor, and the reason I did this is because it's more wood and we're trying to continue that theme, but also it creates such a high contrast between the floor and the walls that I think is quite dramatic and impactful, and I really like the finished result. In order to create some support structures for the canopy that overhangs our front door, I'm simply going to head over to our emu and wallaby habitat from not quite last week's episode actually, week before, and we are going to just nick a couple of the poles that I used to support that structure, and we are simply going to extend by duplicating the poles to make sure that they reach our roof. I knew basically from the beginning that when creating this habitat I was going to want a nice rocky border to the pathway that leads to the building, and one of the main reasons that I wanted that is that it would create a very natural barrier for the habitat that we're building here. And what I'm going to use is some of the tropical rocks. As they are so dark, it's kind of reminiscent of almost a volcanic rock. It's not quite black, as I really don't like how black rocks look in this game personally, but it's really nice and dark, which means we can start to blend it into the kind of volcanic themes that we get from the Oceania pack, which at the time of building hasn't come out. By the time we get to finishing up this habitat, that was the Wednesday that it came out. At the moment we're looking at, I was building on Monday or Tuesday, so we haven't quite got access to the Oceania building pieces, but I was keeping that stuff in mind, that I kind of want to tie it into that theming, so that's why we're going for such dark rocks, to tie into that kind of volcanic feel, as we want to start to introduce that across the zoo as well. Now I think that this is going to create a really nice natural kind of path up to our building. I don't often use the blank path, the one that is just dirt, but I think for this particular structure it works quite nicely. For the barrier that our guests would be able to look over to get into our main habitat, I wanted to create something a little bit unique, I guess, in terms of what we've done so far on the channel and what we're going to be having in this zoo. Now the basic premise is it is a nice wooden, really basic fence, and we're just going to take one of the poles that we used in a previous habitat, which is the Indonesian themed wooden poles. I think they're quite lovely for creating kind of a base fencing. I think it's a really good way of doing that. Going to use those pieces to create some fence posts and then some beams in between that are going to be bridging the gap. And then what we're going to do is use various bark pieces, which I believe were introduced in the Twilight pack. I could be wrong there. There are 3 different types of bark piece. And we're going to use those to line the front of the barrier that our guests are going to be seeing. It's a nice natural looking texture, and it kind of helps to suggest that this is a very natural area. However, on the inside of the habitat, we want to ensure that our koala bears in particular can't climb out, because if the fence is made of wood, then of course they can. So what we're going to do is we're going to take some of the aluminium sheeting that came from this Australian pack as part of the roofing set, and we are going to line the back portion of these fencing pieces so that the animals can't climb out of their habitat. And once we had got the perimeter that we wanted with this particular barrier, it's just a matter of going back through the individual pieces and kind of adjusting some of the bark so that it doesn't look too repetitive. We're going to be raising and lowering certain pieces, rotating them, just to create a bit of randomness and make sure that it doesn't look exactly the same all the way along. Now, as we mentioned earlier, we do want to try and keep a consistent theme throughout this zoo. So what we're going to do is, to complete this habitat, we are going to go and grab the fence that we made in a previous video for the emus and wombats, and we're going to complete this habitat using this building piece. And this is just going to be on the side of the habitat where our guests wouldn't be able to access, so therefore they're not going to be looking through this fence. It doesn't need to look pretty, it's literally just to create an edge to this habitat to ensure animals don't get out. And once again, looking at this piece, the mesh there, koalas are going to be able to climb that. So what we're going to do is we are going to take some more aluminium sheeting and kind of just cover the bottom portion of this fence to ensure that our animals cannot climb out. Now it's time to start moving on to the decorating for this habitat, and something that I want to make sure that I use in this Australian themed zoo are these wonderful painted rock pieces. So for this particular piece, the gecko painting, I'm going to sink it into the surface of a rock that we have at the border of this habitat, and it is of course one of the red desert rocks because that basically matches the colour of these rock painting pieces, and I think it blends in pretty well. Then we're going to start adding our educational Zoopedia boards, and we're going to be using the frames from the Australian pack. Outside, we're always going to use these pallet looking things with a metal frame on it, something that looks like it's kind of just been thrown together and it's been pretty weathered by being outside all the time. Inside, we might use something a bit more fancy, but whilst we're on the exterior of our habitats, we are always going to be using these kind of rugged looking frames. Now, decorating the inside of this building really was just a matter of seeing what worked. The Australian pack offers so many really nice decorations, but for covering an entire building where you don't want it to be too repetitive, it can be kind of tricky. So we covered one wall using Australian pieces, and we knew the Oceano pack was going to be coming soon, so I just kind of waited until that did come out to complete the decorating of the interior of this building. But overall, I'm really quite happy with how it looks. Here's something that I would just like to mention before we dive into the planting of this habitat, and it's a fun little idea that I had. When you're in a zoo and there are animals that are likely to climb out of their habitat, but the keepers want to keep a tree or something in there, what you often see is a metal collar of sorts around the top of the tree, ensuring that the animals can't climb past a certain point. So I had the idea of using some of the New World planters. They are some metallic plant pots, and just rising them up the tree trunk to create kind of a collar, and I think it works pretty nicely. Now we're going to move on to the decoration of the habitat itself, and that includes obviously putting in all of our foliage, which is easily the best part of any habitat build, and all of our enrichment items, and making sure animals can be watered and fed. But before I pop it in time lapse to show you that, I would like to give you my own fact of the day about one of the animals. Of course, you'll get Floki's fact of the day in a minute for both animals, but I want to talk about the koala a little bit and just how strange they really are. Now, most of us already know, I'm assuming, that the koalas are one of the, or potentially the only animal in the animal kingdom that eats eucalyptus. It is a famously toxic plant. Animals just don't eat it, but koalas do for some bizarre reason. Now, the fact is, they actually can't eat eucalyptus. They aren't born able to eat this stuff. In fact, how they train their gut biome to be able to deal with eucalyptus is babies have to eat the feces of their mother. Their guts then adapt to the poison elements that are found in the feces and build up a tolerance against it. So by the time they've moved on to eating leaves, they actually are immune to it by that point. They don't actually start out that way. And that's very, very weird for a couple of reasons. Animals eating each other's feces in the wild isn't that unusual. Normally it's the other way around. Normally it's mothers eating the feces of their children in order to mask scents and stuff and keep areas a bit more hygienic. Make sure predators can't find them is one of the main things. But the other way around is really quite strange. And the thing that confuses me the most about it is that how did this start? Because you get back to a point eventually where there was just one koala who decided, you know what, I'm going to eat these horrible leaves enough to make me a little bit unwell. I'm going to eat them enough that eventually I will just be able to be fine with them. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's an excellent adaptation because they have that niche. They have ownership over eucalyptus plants. No one is fighting them for it, but it is still very, very strange, and it's something that I don't really like to think about. So yeah, there you go, the more you know. We're now going to move on to the planting. Enjoy the rest of the video. We will get to some cinematics after this short time lapse for you. Thank you so much for having watched this video. If you did enjoy it, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Let me know what animal you'd like to see next in our Australian mini zoo. Subscribe to the channel to see the rest of this series, and until next time, I will see you later.